We all learned the nursery rhyme at school. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor doggie a bone. When she got there, the cupboard was bare, so the poor little doggie had none. We've all felt like old Mother Hubbard at times. We open the fridge or the cupboard, and it's just about empty. We've nothing to provide, even a snack. It's embarrassing when visitors drop in unexpectedly and you have nothing to offer them. You make an apology and explain that you're just about to do a major shop. Your apology is accepted, but it doesn't change the reality, which is that you have nothing in the fridge or cupboard to give to your visitors. The choice is either sit and starve, chat of course, or get a takeaway from your nearest KFC. They built a new one out of Jerabumber near the roundabout, so I'm okay. A young man called Saul knew what it was like to be old Mother Hubbard, or to be like old Mother Hubbard, maybe I should say. Listen to these words in 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 7. David read these words a moment or two ago. Saul said to his servant, "If we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" If you want a text this afternoon, then the words are, "The food in our sacks is gone." Saul had been sent by his father Kish on an errand to look for some donkeys that were lost. It seemed to Saul a straightforward task. He was confident he would succeed. Saul was a young man with boundless energy. He had sharp eyes, strong arms, and nimble feet. In his search, he made full use of all his faculties. He climbed the mountains and trekked the plains. Through the exhausting heat of the Middle Eastern sun, he followed one animal trail after another. He was always hoping that round the next corner or over the next hill, success would crown his efforts. But the path and the search beat him down at last. With all the fervent enthusiasm of youth to help him, he couldn't find the missing donkeys. In the end, despite his unstinting efforts, he had no success. Saul was left feeling very frustrated, weary, and defeated. He was like old Mother Hubbard, whose cupboard was bare. The food in our sacks is gone. I wonder, is this how you feel as you attend this lunchtime winter communion service? You haven't unburdened your feelings to anyone. You've been keeping a stiff upper lip. You've been trying to satisfy the hunger in your heart with hard work and forced interests. But you are feeling very weary and worn down and defeated. In your frustration, you have to admit the cupboard of your life is bare, with the possible exception of a few skeletons. The trouble with Saul was that God was not consciously in his seeking. It was all about him, his strength, his efforts, and strategies. He passed through one town and another, but he never passed through the gates of dependence upon God. It's not surprising his search for the lost donkeys was in vain. You might say, to trouble God with such a mundane matter of seeking strayed donkeys is ridiculous. Well, actually, the opposite is true. Not to trouble God about such ordinary things is to invite trouble. You see, once you leave God out, the adversary comes in. Success and fulfillment are only found with God. James Barr wrote, "There is nothing too small for his interest, and nothing too great for his power." Saul, in the midst of his failure and frustration, recognized that he needed God's help. But how could he obtain it? He possessed no money, which meant he couldn't pay the price for a meeting with the man of God. Just then a servant stepped forward and said, we have the words in verse 8, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so that he will tell us what way to take." In that little statement, there are two key phrases. I have. I will give it. Through the medium of a gift, Saul was brought into touch with the man of God. In a similar way, our great need is met. We can never pay the price for deep communion with God. But even as we express our inability to pay the price, all we have to do is remember that Jesus took upon himself the form of a servant and says to us, I have, I give, I will pay. Indeed, more than that, what Jesus is saying to us today is, I have already paid. We don't need to be afraid to come to this communion table on the grounds of our inability to pay, so to speak. The bread and the wine that we will see later in the service are eloquent expressions of the fact that Jesus has met our obligations. He has paid the price. We have no bread in our sacks, but Jesus has provided bread for us on this communion table. As we read on in the story, Saul was a guest at a sacred feast, and we have all the details of that in verse 13 that I won't take time to read just now. A feast was provided on the high place of the city where Samuel, the man of God, dwelt. Firstly, it was a sacrificial feast. The victim had been slain and its blood was sprinkled about the altar. Secondly, it was attended by those who were specially invited by Samuel. Thirdly, it required the presence of Samuel in order that the guests might properly partake of the provision. Before the meal began, there was a blessing on the food that came from the sacrifice. This feast provided by Samuel, that Saul was able to partake of, foreshadows the Lord's Supper that we are sharing in today in this Warrior's Chapel. I want you to realize that a greater than Samuel is here. Jesus, prophet, priest, and king. He is here with us now. He has provided this communion feast through the sacrifice of his broken body and shed blood on the cross. We come to this table as invited guests of Jesus. We can't just force our way in. We wait to be invited, and so we have. We cannot eat until he comes. His presence with us is necessary before we can eat. Well, I've good news for you. Jesus is here. His presence can be sensed by all of us. At this table, we can partake of Christ's provision. We eat the bread and drink the wine, and thereby signify our participation in the benefits of his death. Think of what they are. There is his forgiveness. There is his peace that he grants unto us. And there is his righteousness that is imputed to us. This communion service is intended to be a celebration of joy in the Lord, in the reception of his numerous benefits, and in the anticipation, and this is really glorious, of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Saul said, "The food in our sacks is gone. No food left, no money with which to pay." But in the end, he found himself sharing in the feast as a guest of the man of God. Your life may be like old Mother Hubbard, whose cupboard was bare. You have nothing left to give. You have nothing with which to pay. There's no need for you to be concerned. Jesus has paid the price, and he invites you and he invites me to be his guests at this sacred feast. Amen.